Okay. We're ready to go again, please? Okay, I would like to introduce our final presenter for the day, Brad Lancaster. Brad is an expert in the field of rainwater harvesting, water management, sun and shade harvesting, and community-stewarded native food forestry farm from Tucson, Arizona. He is also a permaculture teacher, designer, consultant, and the author of Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond. So welcome, Brian.
All right, thanks all for the opportunity to share with you. So I want to start off by asking you all to ask yourselves these questions. So what's the story of the place where you live? And, what's the story that makes you resonate with that place? What's the story that makes you love that place? And then what is your relationship to that place and its story? Because that then answers the last question, is what's your role in that story? And whether or not you're conscious of it, we all very much play an active role in the story of the place that we call home. So I want to start off, as you're thinking about that, telling you a story of my place, Tucson. So Tucson, Arizona, near the U.S.-Mexico border, we're in a dry land community. We get about 11 inches of rain a year, which I think is interesting. We're only getting about 2 inches of rain less than Regina gets. So the big difference is we're a much hotter climate. So we lose that water much more quickly to evaporation and evapotranspiration. So these two slides, they show a huge change that happened in about 100 years. So on the left, you can see that we used to have this very abundant, absorbent living sponge of riparian forests, mesquite, hackberry, and other trees. And when it rained, the bulk of the rain that fell from the sky would rapidly be absorbed to recharge the aquifer and recharge the river, the Santa Cruz River, which used to flow year-round. It no longer does. It's now pretty much a dead river. And that happened because we started pumping the groundwater at a rate that exceeded natural recharge. So the groundwater table continued to go down to the point that the roots could no longer access the water. We then lost the riparian forests. And as we lost more of that living sponge, the water more quickly ran off and evaporated off as opposed to infiltrating. So our groundwater table continued to drop at an ever-increasing rate. So in just about 100 years, we've lost our river, we've lost the springs and artesian wells that used to be abundant throughout the Tucson Basin. The groundwater table has dropped over 100 meters and continues to drop in many parts of the basin. And we've replaced that living sponge with bare, compact earth and pavement. Things are going to get happy in a moment, okay? We got to start depressing. So So then we look at these photos at more closely at what our watershed looks like in the built environment, and you see that we're a hydrophobic society. I mean, we are afraid of water. We may not be conscious of it, but the way we're designing to get rid of that free gift from the sky as quickly as possible. So we've got the sea of pavement parking lots, and then in our residential landscapes, the water comes off the roof and then through a rock-lined channel goes to the street, and then it hits the guns of Navarone and they shoot the water out of the system. So this is dehydration infrastructure. We're literally dehydrating our already dry community through the way we're building. And this also leads to dysentery. So when we do get rains, now we're noticing the flood regime is changing. Floods that used to occur every 100 years are now occurring closer to every 10 years. But the rainfall pattern has not changed. The only thing that's changed is the condition of the watershed. So instead of being pervious and absorbent as it was in the past, it's now not. So we get these crazy spike flood flows as that water's flowing off the paved surfaces. Now, that is horrible for traffic, road conditions, whatnot. We get a lot more potholes, huge liabilities, accidents. But it's also awesome because there is this growing urban tourism sport of urban runoff kayaking. And it's fantastic for that. So this is my neighbor, Matt Weber, literally kayaking down First Street, which in our neighborhood becomes a river when we get a good rain event. So as we are so efficiently getting rid of that sky juice, that rain, as quickly as possible, we are having to spend huge amounts of resources trying to replace the water we've drained. So on the left, this is the Central Arizona Project Canal. It's a canal that's over 300 miles long, and it pumps water an elevation rise of over 3,000 feet from the Colorado River to Phoenix and Tucson. It takes a lot of energy to move water because it's so heavy. So that canal is the single largest consumer of electricity in the state of Arizona because of all the pump stations along its route. And since we're burning a lot of fossil fuels to generate the power to run those pumps, it's the single largest emitter of carbon in the state of Arizona, that canal. And as we, along with so many other communities throughout the Southwest, are now pulling water out of the Colorado, whereas historically we all gave water to the Colorado River because we're all in their watershed, the river no longer makes it to Mexico. So we are contributing to the death of a much greater river, the Colorado River, after killing our local river, the Santa Cruz River. Depressed yet? This story depresses me, okay? And I hate this story, okay? So getting back to that question of, what's the story of your place? Well, when I look at this story, I'm like, I can't stand this. Because if this is the story of my place and I am a citizen of this place, then is it my role to contribute to this story, to be part of the river killers? And to that I say, hell no, because I can't take that. If that's my calling, if that's my purpose, kill me now. So then I have to ask, well, is there a better story? Is there a different way I could contribute to help shift the story of my place? And I find great hope in very small but very effective efforts. And they are guided by this idea of let's look to the inherent potential already freely at hand where we are, that we're not currently looking at, and might that bring a shift? So I did some simple calculations and found that more rain falls on the surface area of Tucson in an average year of rain than the entire population consumes, of over 500,000 residents, consumes of municipal water in an average year. So more rain falls on our desert community than the community consumes. But you wouldn't know it because we get rid of that water as quickly as possible. So what if we shifted how we manage that water? What if we helped reinvest that water so we're giving back more water to the system than we take out over the year? And it's similar in Regina. So these numbers here, it's so the average utility water consumption per resident of Regina is 300 liters per person per day. And if you look at how much rain falls on the community over a year, there's 747 liters of rain per person per day in Regina. Now, if you're wondering where I got those numbers, you can download these one-page place assessments. The one I did for Regina, I've got all the notes and the references on the resources page of my website, which is harvestingrainwater.com. I make these as a little cliff notes or cheat sheet of some of the key information of place. So we've got the watershed information at the top, then some sun information for passive heating and cooling info, the climate, your average high and lows, your extreme high and low temperatures, the average wind direction and speed, and your extremes, and then a lot of information on water, which I'll touch on in a moment. Watergy, how much energy is consumed to pump and treat water in Regina, and then the totem species, the canaries in the coal mine. So we'll tap back into this. Oh, and I also want to say, if any of you are not from Regina, on this on the resources page of my website, I show you how to make this for your own community and how to get this information, and I give you the template. So here's one of these simple little strategies that gives me great hope. So this is just outside Tucson in the Catalina Mountains in the foothills, where in the Civil Conservation Corps put in this little rock check dam perpendicular to the flow of the water that used to go down this creek. And it's a speed hump in the flow. So it slowed the flow enough that a bunch of sediment dropped out of the flow on the upslope side of the check dam and created this sand tank in which all this filtering vegetation now grows and helps, infiltrate the water as well as filter it. So now, where there was no spring before, there's a seep spring that will flow for months after a rain event. So where there was no spring before, there now is a spring. And I told you a story before of how people have killed springs. Well, here's how people are helping create springs. I love that. Okay, that gives me hope. All right, so that's more the path I want to take. So I look at this as a generative strategy, whereas before the story I told you was degenerative. Things got worse over time. We were consuming more than we were giving back. The health of the ecological system that sustains us was degrading. Here, at minimum, it's maintaining. And this strategy is starting to break down. I don't know if you can see the rocks that are missing there where the pour-over has scoured a hole. So it's not perfect. We could do better than this. What if instead of just being generative, we could be regenerative? So the strategy actually fixes itself. The strategy actually grows itself as opposed to being reliant on us. So that's what we've got here in this example. So it's a similar structure. This is what we call a one-rock dam. It's only one rock high, but multiple rocks wide. So it's less heroic. It's not a wall or a dam. It's more subtle. And it's just using local rock. But you're more strategic on where you place it. So you're working with that waterway's natural flow of water and sediment and where things deposit. But this is outside Silver City, New Mexico. And by placing these here, this is a strategy where Van Clothier is trying to bring back riparian grasslands that had been lost. We've lost over 90% of our wetlands in the southwest U.S. in just 100 years. But here they're starting to bring them back. So things had eroded to bare bedrock, but this speed hump slowed the flow enough that sediment dropped out on the upslope side. Moisture lingered longer in that sediment, seed germinated in that sediment, and now we're growing a living comb. So, yeah, that rock structure, it can be no better than generative because it's not alive. But the whole point of it is to enable the living system to take root. And that is the regenerative part. That's the part that can fix itself. So what we're finding is we start to grow these living combs of grass. That slows the water enough that more sediment drops out, more seeds germinate, it grows and grows. So we've gone from bare bedrock to the riparian grasses, the wetlands have returned. And this was all in a matter of 3 years. So and I don't know if you can see, there's the landscape's telling you the extent to which the wetlands used to extend. It doesn't quite yet. Can you see that pattern? The landscape's telling you. The vegetation's telling you where the wetlands used to extend to, and that Van and Bill are aiming to get it back. Exactly. It's the trees. So the wetland came right up to just about the base of those trees. So we're halfway there. So the next step is to put one more layer of rock on those first one rock dams, and that'll bring it up to the original level. So there's all these rock structures. You can't even see them anymore because they're now covered by that vegetation. Here's Van standing on one of them, and he's pointing to how the riparian grasses, the wetlands, are literally growing uphill. They're following the water that is wicking up the banks through capillary action. There's now so much water stored in that landscape because of the wetlands that have come back, it's literally growing itself uphill. Okay, this really excites me, okay? Because basically you just set up the system so you're nudging it to then grow itself, all right? Much more resilient. So here in the built environment, we can be inspired by similar things. So what show on the left is it's what I don't advocate. I don't want you to do. Do not do that. But it's what we do. So we've got a dysfunctional topography where the grass area in the upper left is higher than the adjoining hardscapes, like sidewalks, road, and whatnot. So when it rains, the surplus water from the storm drains to the sidewalk, to the street, to the storm drains. And when we over-irrigate, the same thing happens. So then we get the conservation thinking, and we say, okay, we're going to replace that more water-consumptive lawn with more xeric plants, more low water use plants. But we still have the dysfunctional topography. So in the storms, surplus stormwater still goes to the sidewalk, the street, and when we irrigate excessively, the same thing happens. But now we also have gravel, because gravel replaces the turf, going into the sidewalk. Now it's no longer accessible to folks in wheelchairs or wheels, and it's starting to clog the drains. And throughout the western U.S., we've got these Cash for Grass programs. A lot of problems with that because you're changing the plant, but you're not changing the foundational dysfunctional topography. So what I advocate is change the topography at the same time. LA is starting to change its Cash for Grass program, so you have to change the topography at the same time. So on the right-hand side, we have basin-like shapes where we've got our plantings. So now the hardscape, the sidewalks and whatnot, become a water source that drains water to the landscape as opposed to the opposite. So we don't contribute water to the storm drain in the street, so on. And so these rain gardens, they become all-water gardens because water moves with gravity. So you can also direct your household quote-unquote wastewater or your lightly used gray water to these same rain gardens in times of no rain. So the water from the drains of your sink, shower, bathtub, and washing machine, you can send that to the same landscape. This can result in a 30 to 70% reduction in potable drinking water consumption at residences. So in the U.S., 30 to 70% of the drinking water consumed is used to irrigate landscapes in single-family residence. This can completely eliminate that if you go all the way. So we want to shift from what I call the upper image, the anti-oasis, into the true oasis. So, all too often we feel like we're an oasis because we're importing all this water and nutrients and whatnot to create this oasis-like effect. But as soon as you turn off that water, it unravels. So could we create a true oasis, a landscape that we could literally walk away from and it would continue to thrive? So design challenge I put out to you all is how can you design a system so that once you've got it established, you can walk away. You literally abandon it, and it'll continue to thrive and evolve without you. That's the challenge, okay? In the upper image, the water used to drain to the street, is a barren heat island oven-like experience. The lower image, photo taken 10 years apart from the upper image, same place. And all that vegetation is irrigated entirely and solely by passively harvested street runoff and direct rainfall in a desert community. Okay? So we can increase the amount of available rainfall by creating this more functional topography. So if we create a rain garden that is sized to capture just the rain falling on it, we get the full amount of rain that's falling from the sky. So let's say you've got 300 millimeters of rain falling on you in an average year. Well, in the typical hilled landscape, you're lucky if you get half that. But in this scenario, you get the full 300. Then in the middle image, if you direct an additional catchment surface, say out of an adjoining roof or patio or driveway, that's about to the same landscaped area, and your catchment area is the same as your planted area, you've now doubled the available rainfall. Same amount of rain falling from the sky, but you've doubled what's available, as long as you've sized your rain garden big enough. And then the right-hand image, you can triple the available rainfall. Now we've got a roof and a patio or walkway draining to it. We've tripled the available rainfall. You can tell I come from a water-scarce area, so I'm very water-greedy. I want to get as much as I can. So the goal, whenever we plant now, is before you plant the rain. So we create the topography that plants that rain, and then we plant the plants. So right from the get-go, we have a functional foundation that can be water sustainable. Okay? We do irrigate our plantings the first 1 to 3 years to get them established, but after that we stop watering. So this is a study done by Aaron Kaufman in Santa Fe, New Mexico. They worked with a community college where they took the runoff from the parking lot, and it was being drained via curb cuts to a landscape strip beside it. So the control was just receiving the runoff but had no rain garden, no basin. Then the other one on the right had a rain garden that they planted some native vegetation in. And they found that the results were dramatic in that you can't just direct the runoff to it, you have to get it to infiltrate. So they found that in the control that was receiving runoff but had no rain garden, they would need over a 10 millimeter rain event to saturate the soil enough that irrigation would no longer be needed. Whereas with the rain garden, they only needed a 4 millimeter rain event to get the same effect. And they found with the rain garden topography in place, the associated landscape, the vegetation never went below the permanent wilting point, meaning it never needed to be irrigated. Whereas the one without the rain garden topography a number of times did need some supplemental water. Okay. So here is just a concept drawing of how you could create these rain gardens around a single-family residence. And here in the left, there's some dotted lines that represents the gray water pipe going to what could be the fruit trees. So we've got another little rule, is we never plant a plant until we first planted the rain. And we never plant an exotic plant needing more water, more care, until we first planted the rain and also planted the gray water. So we're sure to have a water source in times of no rain. So why do you think I don't know if it's showing up in the slide. Well, you can see on the right. You can see the colored dots represent the fruit for the exotic fruit trees. Why are they there and not on the side of the house? Yeah, they're getting gray water, but why are we directing the gray water there? Huh? Shady side? Okay, so that's good. You get more winter chill hours, so that's good. But there's another key reason. Where do you want to hang out and have some lemonade and play the banjo? Maybe on the back porch. So we put the fruit trees where you're more likely to hang out. And you're more likely to see there's fruit on the trees and you might eat it, as opposed to the wildlife. So then we set up the water infrastructure to support those fruit trees where you're more likely to interact with them. Okay. I just showed the bottom right image is showing by Tombstone, Arizona. It's an area so dry, there's almost no trees in the landscape. It's just creosote bushes. We're arid adapted plants. But along the highway, in the little swale alongside the highway, you've got a linear forest of trees that nobody planted and nobody cares for. Nobody waters. How is it possible you have that linear forest of trees in an area where you typically don't have trees? Runoff from the road. Yeah, this is all simple stuff. And instead of running away, it gathers there, infiltrates, and boom, you get, yeah, it's all working. You can walk away. That's basically a beneficial ruin that nobody cares for. So want to get to this idea of co-evolving mutualism. So, we prioritize the use of native plants because they are the best adapted to our climate, soils, and wildlife. But we don't stop there. We also look to how can we boost the performance of those native plants. So we found that typically in the Tucson, Arizona area, people plant hybrid mesquite trees from South America. And they're prone to blowing over in the windstorms, whereas our native mesquite trees have more resilient roots for our soils and they don't blow over. But we've also found that the native velvet mesquite support over 60 native pollinators, different species of pollinators, whereas the non-native mesquite only support 12. So if you want a more resilient plant to bring in more pollinators for your garden or whatnot, to bring in more wildlife, it's key to plant a native. You can't do better. All right. And here on the left, we've got a guy who's literally vacuuming his yard. Okay? Did not stage that shot. Okay? This is what gives me nightmares at night. And I think what happened here is he spent a lot of money to conserve water. So, took out his lawn, put in all this rock and gravel, and he didn't want to cover up his investment with leaf drop and whatnot. So he's literally vacuuming up the leaves. So he's vacuuming up the sponge. He's vacuuming up the fertility of his system. And whereas on the right, what we're advocating for there is if you create these basin-like shapes that capture water, it also captures leaf drop. And leaves are called leaves because we're supposed to leave them. Okay? So we are ever increasing the fertility of the soil by leaving the leaves and then also cutting up the prunings and putting them in there. And because we've got this nice basin shape, it holds it there, doesn't blow around. And because we've got more water concentrated there, the rate of decomposition is much faster. Okay, so this mulch doesn't build up. It self-decomposes. And becomes more absorbent over time, more highly productive. So some studies were done by Mitch Pavlo-Zuckerman and other researchers at the University of Arizona that might make you want to avoid what is sweeping the United States, which is a rock and gravel fetish. And I see evidence of that starting to creep into Regina landscapes. Please beware. Okay, so with the intention of removing lawn perhaps to reduce water consumption, bringing in this rock and gravel which elevates temperatures and then elevates water loss to evaporation. And it's not really helping you with infiltration. So Mitch and other researchers looked at 2 street runoff harvesting rain gardens. One that was mulched with rock and gravel, the other that was mulched with organic matter. And he found that the ones that were mulched with organic matter had twice as much soil moisture as those with the rock and gravel. Also found the ones with the organic matter had twice as much natural bioremediation or natural filtration of the pollutants coming off the street. So I'm just saying if you're going to go to the effort of creating the right topography, make sure you've got the right top dressing for the best performance. And here we can see how we've transformed from our pretty much our native soils lacking organic matter in top left to then creating the basin-like shape, letting the leaves gather, and then cutting prunings and dropping them in there, bringing in no resources from outside, not bringing in any mulch, just what's freely available on the street block. In 3 years, the bottom left, you can see this resulting soil. So we went from pretty much lacking organic matter and much soil life to just being full of it. And this is essential because then we're collaborating, as was mentioned in the earlier talks, with that soil life. So we get more of that beneficial mycorrhizal fungi, and the hair-like roots of the hyphae, the roots of the fungus, fuse with those of the photosynthesizing plants. Because the fungus can't generate its own sugars, so it depends on the plants to give them sugars, and in return it gives the photosynthesizing plants more water and minerals through its branching hyphae network, thereby expanding the root network of the associated plants by well over 100 times. So again, what I'm just trying to emphasize is if we create these systems that are encouraging more organic matter, that's the habitat for these lives that will collaborate with us at no charge, okay, and dramatically increase the porosity of these soils and how much water it can hold. So this is a co-housing development. Photos taken in the upper left as we were putting in the landscape in place, and then the right and bottom images once it was in place. So the whole landscape is rain gardens, a whole series of rain gardens from top to bottom, with a raised walkway between the rain gardens. These are high clay soils. We had 2 inches of rain, so that's trying to convert to metric real quick. Forgot. So that's 50 millimeters of rain. Did I get that right? So 50 millimeters of rainfall in less than an hour. And would have been a real problem because we would have had these puddles, would have been losing water to evaporation, and mosquitoes would start to breed. So what we're lacking was the sponge. So we put 4 inches of organic mulch on the surface and planted the living pumps of vegetation, and then had another 50 millimeters of rain in less than an hour, and it all infiltrated in less than an hour. And 10 years later, this is what the landscape looks like. Again, in our desert community, it gets no supplemental irrigation. It's just being watered by on-site rainwater, the runoff from the paths and the roofs, and household wastewater turned resource water. Okay, so no culinary drinking water is being used to irrigate that landscape. This is an overview of that site. So the rectangles with the numbers are the buildings, the blue areas are the rain gardens, and the green circles are the trees. So we had a civil engineer add up the cumulative storage capacity of all those rain gardens, and it exceeds the stormwater control capacity of a conventional stormwater control system by 10 times. So not only is this a vastly superior flood control system, it is also the foundation of a water sustainable landscape. Okay, so getting that multifunctional effect. And within these rain garden-like shapes, we create many microclimates. So we've got the bottom zone, the terrace zone, and the top zone. So then we plant our most water-tolerant, water-needy plants in the bottom. Also our most cold-tolerant, because cold air pools in the low spots. And then in the terrace, the less water-tolerant, needy plants, and on the top, the least water-tolerant, needy plants. And we're trying to make this easier for people that don't know about plants. So we're working with nurseries, so they categorize their plants by their preferred rain garden zone. Because people go to a nursery and they'll just say, hey, I want a plant with a nice, beautiful red flower, but I need it for the bottom zone. They're like, great, here's your bottom zone red-flowered plants. And if you need some terrace ones, they're over there, and if you need the top ones, they're over there. So just make it easier for people to get it right. I've got a number of principles for harvesting water. These are just 2. I've got these principles in my books, but one is we want to slow, spread, and sink the flow of water as much as possible instead of shooting it out of the system. So here we've got this we've got the meandering water. It comes off the roof into the tank, then out the overflow into a rain garden, overflows through a drainage swale, and then into another behind a contour berm, and so on. So we're slowing, spreading, and sinking the flow of water to maximize the infiltration. The other principle on this slide is you always want to have an overflow and use it as a resource. So all too often I find People put in a rain garden with no planned overflow, or put in a rainwater tank with no planned overflow, and that overflow becomes a nuisance. Well, it can instead be a great resource. And we also want to live within the balance. We want to balance our water budget with our water needs in a landscape. So here, let's say we've got 34,000 liters a year of water coming off that small house roof. In my area, that would be enough water to sustain 3 native food-bearing trees, each needing 11,000 liters of water a year. And by planting them within or beside these rain gardens, everything's set. You know, you just walk away. But what if you want a higher water use plant, like, well, in my case, a citrus tree? Wouldn't do that here. But that's going to need much more water. So we only get 1 tree, not 3, because we're living within the budget of that water coming off the roof. Now, you don't have to go this far if you don't want, but I am advocating you go this far. So you're more living in balance with your system, and you're able to give back more than you take. Now, with the citrus tree, while its water needs could be met by the roof, in our climate, we have many-month dry spells, and that exotic tree is going to need irrigation when the rain's not coming. So it's not adapted like our native trees. So we can direct the household gray water in the times of no rain, and then all works. Okay? If you want a vegetable garden, it's good to put in a rainwater tank. And maybe you're asking, well, why don't I just do the same thing as a citrus tree? Well, got a question for you. How many of you crap your pants? I crap mine. I don't mean to. It's always an unpleasant surprise, but it sometimes happens. Okay? So if I were to then water, or not say water, but if I were to wash my crap pants in the washing machine and send the gray water out to the vegetable garden and the raw leafy greens that I don't cook, I just eat raw, I'm going to be crapping my pants some more. Okay? And if I'm in the shower, you know, washing the crap off my backside, and that goes to the garden and the greens that I don't cook before I eat, I'm going to be crapping myself some more. So, right water in right place. So the great thing about the fruit tree is all the fruit's up here, and it's not coming in contact with that crap water. Now, I am exaggerating the scenario, okay? There's no known instance of anyone becoming ill in the U.S. from contact with gray water. But let's just play it safe with best practices. So with a vegetable garden, I like to collect the rainwater off the roof in a tank and then dole that out to the raw greens that I don't cook. Cooked greens are no problem with gray water. So let's look at some of the potential of gray water. So in Tucson, Arizona, 45% of the water consumed in a single-family residence is used outside, largely for irrigation. So that big green swath of the pie is outdoor water use. Now look indoors at these blue sections of the pie, the shower, faucets, and washing machine, clothes washer. So if you combine those 3 sections of pie, it meets most of the outdoor section of pie. So I'm just encouraging you all to look at gray water as a fantastic source of irrigation water. And it's great for the citizenry because they've already paid for it. So it doesn't cost them anything more. And this, if anyone's on a septic system, it dramatically enhances the life of that septic system, and it improves our stormwater quality. How do you tap that gray water? Well, here's one option. So you can throw a hose over a branch of a tree for an outdoor shower in the summer months when it's pleasant to shower outside. And just put that where you want the plants to get some water. Or you can do in the left side image something a little more elaborate where you're directing the drain from the indoor shower bathtub out to the landscape, maintaining a 2% minimum slope in the pipe. So it's all gravity. There's no tanks. There's no pumps. That's what I advocate. Keep it real cheap, real easy, low maintenance. So let's see. And this is my favorite system for a washing machine. So you already have the drain by the washing machine going to the sewer. Add 1 or more pipes that send that out to the landscape. So every time you do a load of wash, you move the drain hose to a different pipe, each sending water to the part of the landscape where you want it to go. This way, you never saturate any part of the landscape. It has a chance to dry out between waterings. And then here we have the pipe outletting minimum 50 millimeters above soil level. So there's no way you're going to clog that outlet with roots or whatnot. It's got a waterfall drop. So all works really well. So it used to be in Arizona that you could only legally harvest your gray water if you went through a very expensive and complicated permitting process. And it failed miserably. Only 2 entities in the entire state of Arizona ever filed for a permit. Okay? So when a number of researchers looked at that, they said, this code completely fails. So they then went and looked out how many people were harvesting their gray water anyway. Turns out, hundreds of thousands, okay, with no guidance from the state. Okay? So they looked at are there any problems? And they said, well, as long as people are following just common sense guidelines, there's no health risk. So the state then, based on this research, changed the entire law. So now it's legal to harvest your gray water with no inspection, no permit, no fee, as long as you're following 13 common sense guidelines. If you are, automatic permit. Never needed to file for it, but you got it. Okay? And since that was the approach that was taken, overnight went from a failed system to a very successful system, because now the state and many nonprofits could go forth and offer guidance and education on how to meet these common sense guidelines. Okay? All right. So it's now required in Tucson, Arizona, to put a gray water harvesting stub out in all new home construction, major home renovation. So what is that? So you've got your pipe going to the sewer, but it's just a little section of pipe that's in your wall and or floor waiting for you to hook up to it. Best case scenario is you actually put a valve in right off the bat. So the folks that want to use their gray water can just open the access hatch, turn the valve, and send it to the landscape, and all is good. If you don't want it, turn it off, close it up, and you don't use it. And you can qualify by taking a free 3-hour class, a $1,000 rebate for your gray water harvesting systems. That's been essential to have that class. Okay. So the goal here, so then what I want to show you here is how a number of these concepts and practices are being used in a commercial context. So this is the Architecture and Planning Building at the University of Arizona, the Capella Building. And the goal, when they created the landscape around it, was how can they create a landscape that, once established, is irrigated entirely by free on-site waters, no imported water. So they collect 85,000 gallons of rainwater from the roof each year, but 95,000 gallons of air conditioning condensate every year from the roof. Air conditioning condensate is basically distilled water, so that all goes via gravity out into the landscape. Then the gray water from the drinking fountain is also sent out to the landscape. They didn't do the sinks and stuff because a lot of students are doing studio projects using questionable glues and other materials, so they didn't want that accidentally going out to the landscape. So you've got these beautiful outdoor classrooms, which I find much more inviting than the indoor classrooms. And the university has found that their student enrollment has dramatically gone up since doing this, because the school is actually walking the talk in this more forward-thinking design, and so the students are attracted to that, and so their enrollment is increasing in the college. And they've gone further, like how can we keep pushing the potential of what's possible? So there's a large cistern in the building that the roof runoff goes to before coming out through this waterfall to irrigate this wetland. You don't have to have that tank system, but it's something that they put in there. But they've got 5 different ecotones of the Sonoran Desert represented. So they've got the water body, they've got the wetlands, they've got the riparian forest, the canyonlands, and the Sonoran uplands, all around this building, all tucked into the microclimate created by the building. So and they're raising endangered fish and frogs in this landscape. and more than people are noticing. So we literally have great blue heron flying into the middle of the city to partake of the bounty in that water body. And we've got bobcats and roadrunners coming in to partake of the feast as well. So, I mean, I love that. I mean, that's really enhancing the vibrancy of place. And then this is my favorite part of that particular landscape. So this is where they used to have a concrete surface drain that was shooting the water from the parking lot right out of the system. So then they went in with jackhammers, jackhammered it, left all the rubble, left all the concrete chunks in place as a urbanite cobble. So urbanite's that urban geologic formation of broken up sidewalk chunks. And they then interspersed it with some native boulders, so it looked a bit more natural. So all the water that used to shoot out now infiltrates along its journey. And that is the sole water source of all this thriving vegetation that's then helping shade and cool the adjoining buildings. So very low cost, very high effect. And this is an overview of that landscape. So all this greenery is the landscape I've just been describing. And it was the intention of Ron Stoltz, the Associated Dean, that pushed this, for this to be a proving ground, to show what is possible for the rest of campus. And he wanted to convert the rest of campus, making all this area the second largest green space on campus. And can you see what natural topographical feature does this mimic? Okay, you've got the buildings, you've got the parking lot. Does this remind you of anything you might see out in the natural world? Especially if you go out to the west, you got the big mesas. It's a canyon. That parking lot is a canyon. That's the low spot, sheltered by the walls, the cliff faces of the mesas all around. So that parking lot should be, if we're just following natural patterns, the greenest spot, the most sheltered spot, the most watered spot, because all the water is coming from those rooftops. Include all the drains as well. So the goal and hope is for this to spread through all of that, with the sole water source being these rooftops and the drains around them. So it's key that we convert or at least shade those paved areas. So found that in Tucson, in the left side image, that's the typical streetscape. That pavement that's unshaded increases temperatures by over 5.5 degrees Celsius, because all the heat being absorbed by that pavement and then radiating out at night. Whereas on the right-hand side, we have a 5.5 degree decrease in temperatures because it's being shaded, and all that vegetation irrigated by the runoff from the street to then water those trees. And here on the right, these are statistics for Regina. So you all get about 333 millimeters of rainfall per year. That's your water income, your natural water income. But your potential loss to evaporation, looking at the pan evaporation rate, is well over 1,000 millimeters of water per year. So that's not to freak you out, that's to inform you. So especially as our climate changes and warms, you're going to have much less water than you do currently, because you're going to be losing it at a much greater rate to evaporation. So that is a little alarm bell that we should be doing anything and everything we can to reduce evaporative loss. Okay, that's why earlier I was talking about the sponge-like effects of our surfaces. That's why we also need to think about windbreaks to reduce the wind shear and whatnot, reducing that evaporative loss. Here's how we're trying to utilize some of the pavement to grow our street side forests. So we are cutting the street curb to direct street runoff into street side basins. And one thing that's maybe different than many of the street side basins I see around the world is these are not flow-through systems. These are backwater or eddy systems. So water comes in to the inlet, fills it up. Sorry, my little, I think I got a better pointer here. So water comes in the inlet, and once it fills the basin, the water then backs up on itself. That's not working either. Darn it. Okay, and then the surplus continues down the street gutter and down to the next basin. So we don't have the potential for erosion because the water's backing up into the basin. It's not flowing through. And we find we also accumulate a lot more organic matter because these systems bring the leaf drop that's fallen on the streets into the street side basins as well. And by putting that curb cut or curb core on the upslope side, we don't lose mulch, okay? And we increase our capacity. All right. So this, in the upper left, is what things look like in 1994 when we started these strategies, and then 10 years, well, a little over 10 years later, in the lower right is the result. So the photo is taken from the same point, and none of that is irrigated with any city water. It's all just rainwater and street runoff, creating a much more walkable, bikeable community, a lot more wildlife, a lot more beauty, property values increased, and none of this is new. We're mimicking traditional Native American strategies. So auction runoff farming is where the indigenous farmers used to plant in the floodplain adjoining the ephemeral waterways, the waterways that only flowed in storm events. And sometimes they'd put a detritus dam to divert a little bit more of that flow out into the floodplain. Well, in the built environment, we have segregated the floodplain from the waterway because the bulk of our waterways are our streets. And we've got that concrete curb keeping the water from making it to the floodplain, thereby increasing the flood risk because we're decreasing infiltration and we're increasing dehydration. So by cutting the curb, we are able to let the water back into that floodplain, and we create street-side basins lower than the elevation of the street. So what's maybe unique about some of the Tucson stuff, a lot of the Tucson stuff, is it was not begun by city initiatives. It was begun by citizen initiatives. So we started doing this curb cutting when it was illegal. So we would do it on Sunday mornings when no one from the city was watching, okay? And so this is one of the illegal curb cuts in action. And then the neighbors came by and like, I don't understand what's going on. I never see you I never see you watering your plantings, but they're growing way faster than mine. They're way healthier. What's going on? We said, oh, well, look, we cut the curb and we're doing all this. So we started building political will. And then got enough people wanting to do this. We approached the city, asked if we could legalize it, and succeeded. And the way we went about those meetings is when we were talking to the city officials, we asked, what are the issues you're experiencing along neighborhood streets? And they said, well, we've got excessive crime, we've got vaporization of the asphalt due to the heat on the asphalt, and that's more potholes. We've got a lot of litter and garbage, we've got flooding, and so on, and a lot of heat-related illnesses along with the heat island effect. So we said, great, we'd like to help you with that. So we think we could help reduce flooding by pulling water off the street. We think we could reduce the vaporization of the asphalt and the potholes by shading and cooling the street. We think we could drop crime by getting more neighbors involved to taking care of these. There's more friendly eyes on the street, more neighbors getting to know neighbors, and so forth. So we succeeded, and instead of being antagonistic from the beginning, it was more how can we collaborate. Okay. So we now have, by working with the city, we've streamlined the process. So we don't do curb cuts much anymore. Now it's mostly curb cores because it's a lot cheaper than making a curb cut. So we do 4-inch, so 100-millimeter diameter holes, and we make sure that the street gutter is notched a little bit too, so the lowest point captures that water, and we angle the curb core down to the basin and in direction of flow. So this little guerrilla action in the neighborhood helped inform and spark community change. So whereas it used to be legal to do this street side runoff harvesting, it's now legal citywide, and it's mandated in new road construction and major road renovation. So, and this is all happened in a 10-year period, and it's incentivized with $2,000 rebates per property after you take the free 3-hour class. But I will say this. It ain't perfect by any means. And maybe this is one of the downsides of it coming from the citizens first, is we found that the enforcement has been very problematic. And so we're working to change that. So while the laws were in place, we found that many of the plan reviewers didn't know what they were looking for. And a lot of the site inspectors didn't know what they needed to look for. So it's been a process to bring that up. We're much better off than we were, but we still got a ways to go. Now I want to shift real quick to some sun and shade harvesting. So I don't know if you guys are aware, but our planet has a 23.5-degree tilt that it maintains as it orbits around the sun. Okay? And because of that, in the summer months, we in the northern hemisphere are leaning towards the sun, so the sun is more directly overhead. Okay? Whereas in the winter months, we are leaning away from the sun, and the sun is lower in the sky. This is why we have seasons. Why didn't I learn that in elementary school? It frustrates me that I didn't. But how can better question is, how can we work with that? So these two images show identical building, one oriented correctly with the long wall facing south and north and the short wall east and west. A study was done in Sacramento, California that looked at two identical apartment buildings, identical in every way except their orientation to the sun. The one on the left is the ideal orientation. The one on the right is the wrong orientation. They found that without turning on any heating or cooling system for a full year, monitoring the interior temperatures, on the left, that correct orientation was almost 10 degrees Celsius warmer in winter and 13 degrees Celsius cooler in summer than the one on the right. The only difference is the orientation of the building. This is no complicated HVAC system or anything like that. Why isn't this standard practice? Why don't we put this in our building codes that you have to orient correctly? Just a question. Okay. So we can then enhance performance even more by building on correct orientation of building with correct orientation of landscape. So here, the upper part of the image is showing you the summer months, and the lower part is the winter months. And since the sun rises in the northeast in summer and sets in the northwest in winter, and is higher in the sky in summer, but then in the winter months it's rising to the southeast and setting in the southwest, and it's lower in the sky in the middle of the day. This is why all day long in the winter months, with this type of landscape that has no big tree plantings on the south, you're getting free sun all day long in the on the south-facing side of your house. And then in the summer months, look at how those trees are helping shade you from the rising sun in the northeast and the setting sun in the northwest. So you're getting cooling when you want cooling, you're getting heating when you want heating, all for free. Why isn't this regular guidance or maybe even requirement in our landscape? Just a question. So let's then celebrate this stuff. Let's show it. So this is my one-car garage turned cottage, so it's my garage. And I raised the roof to make some loft space. So the arrow there is showing you the angle of the noonday sun here in winter, here in spring equinox, March 21st, and here summer, June 21st. Those angles are our 32-degree latitude sun angles. But you can see that we design it so the roof overhang to window relationship, we're getting full sun all winter long. But then in the winter, we're getting full shade thanks to the overhang effect of that roof. So again, you just keep building one step on top of the other, so it just keeps getting better and better. So the building can heat and cool itself without mechanical systems. Now let's bring in the landscape. What's another thing we can do? So all too often I find people will plant a tree for one season at the expense of another. So in our hot climate, people will plant a shade tree on the south side of the house that shades and cools them in summer, but then makes them colder in winter. And it also shades out the solar panels on the roof and the solar hot water heater. And then they think, well, I'll get a little smarter. I'll plant a leafless winter deciduous tree on the south side, so it'll drop all its leaves. But just the bare branches will block out over 50% of your potential heat and light gain, and your solar panels won't work. So you've got to space your trees far enough from the south-facing side of the building so all works in all seasons. So here's a little number that works great for Regina and your latitude. So for every foot something is tall, for every meter something is tall, multiply that by 3.5, and that's how far the shadow will be cast to the north on the shortest day of the year with the longest shadow of the year on the winter solstice. So with that simple ratio, you can very easily place things so you don't shade what you don't want shaded in the winter months. Okay? And I've got that little ratio for every latitude on Earth in my books and on my website. Okay. So then to wrap it up, I want to show you just neighborhood scale stuff. So the whole idea is let's show the flow and live into the potential. So on the lower right of this image, you see a before photo. So that before photo was taken where I was standing when I took this after photo. So I encourage you all to take before photos before you put in your installation so people can see what transformation has occurred and how. Because all too often we think stuff's always been this way, or we forget what it was like. And I think it's key to show people what change is possible. And this is my sister-in-law on the upper left. She is harvesting the mesquite pods that we grow from the mesquite tree. And I mentioned earlier that we look to the local ethnobotanical record to see what native plants produce food, and not just food, but really good-tasting food. Medicine, dyes, craft materials, building products, and so forth. And that's what we emphasize in our plantings. And then when we are selecting plantings for another block in the neighborhood, we look for what biodiversity is lacking there. What species are they lacking? And then we bring those in. Because the goal is we want everyone on every block to be able to walk no more than a block to collect the seed to bring in more of those plantings in their yard or street side. So we've got all this food that's growing there. And then in the lower left, you can see the kids in the neighborhood harvesting the prickly pear fruit. This is another reason I think why crime has dropped. When you got a bunch of giggling kids harvesting the fruit grown along their street side, it's hard to get the anger and the motivation to commit a crime. Okay, they kind of change how you feel. And by having this harvestable foods on the street, you spend more time on the street. People are like, what are you doing? And you can tell them about it. And more people learn about it. But you're also getting to know a neighbor you didn't know before, or you're getting to know them better. So it's building that community at the same time. And I just want to ask, you might be thinking, yeah, that's Tucson. What about here? Well, look to your ethnobotanical record. What are your gems? Might they be acorns? Might they be pine nuts? Might they be currants? Various berries. You have a unique indigenous foods to this area. So showcase those. So how can we bring that into our green infrastructure? So it's not just doing water management, it's also becoming a living pantry, a living pharmacy, a living craft and hardware store. And we're tying into the rich cultural history of all the various peoples that have lived here. So to go further with that, we got a grant to put a hammer mill on a trailer so that we could grind 5 gallons of whole mesquite pods into 1 gallon of flour in 5 minutes. Those mesquite pods being the people harvested in the neighborhood. And you can sell the resulting 1 gallon of flour for over $70, because that's how valuable these native wild foods are, because they slow the body's intake of sugars. So they're wonderful for people with hypoglycemia and diabetes. And they taste really good. And a lot of people are like, well, I don't know what it tastes like. So that's why I had these mesquite pancake breakfasts with prickly pear syrup. So people could eat a food they already knew, but with a unique ingredient that is unique and local to their place. And like, wow, this is really good. And like, yeah. And you can use it in other ways. So then we created a cookbook that shows people how they can create all these various foods using local indigenous ingredients grown in their neighborhood. And the way we created this cookbook is we gave away the ingredients to people throughout the community and said, what do you like to eat? And what do you need flour for? Well, try this mesquite flour. So then we shifted from pancake breakfast to these bake sales where people were getting mesquite baklava, mesquite tortillas, mesquite tamales, and prickly pear borscht and whatnot. So it was a great way for people to bring their own unique culinary history and heritage and fuse that with something unique and indigenous to this place to create something entirely new that ups the value in everyone's ideas of this, and not just of these foods, but how they are grown in a way that is enhancing the hydrology of place. It's helping recharge, not discharge, the aquifer in a way that we might bring back the rivers rather than kill the rivers. So it's just building, building, building. Hope you're getting excited. I got the hairs going up on the back of my neck. And so we then, to make more of this happen, at no cost to the city, we have this annual program where the adjoining property owner gets to transform their part of the public right-of-way. So we get volume discounts by getting a lot of neighbors in the neighborhood all at once to do this. So the contractor doesn't have to come in multiple times. Just one shot, do it all. And we are getting the rock that we line the basin banks with, the steep banks, we get a volume discount on that. Same thing on the plants. So we then train up the contractors so they can do this work in other neighborhoods for other people. So that upper left is just starting, and the lower right, the end result. And there we have growing in that's only 6 months old there. We have this riparian grass, a giant saccatone grass. So when the Spaniards first came to Tucson, Arizona, they said the grass was so tall it tickled the underbelly of the horses they rode. And then you go there today, you're like, what grass? But it's that grass. It's the giant saccatone grass, which died out when the groundwater table dropped and we dehydrated our watershed. But it thrives with no supplemental irrigation in these street-side basins. So we're actually bringing back that heritage to place. And then while we get the contractors to build the infrastructure, kind of similar to what Rob was saying, we don't have them do the plantings. We have the community do the plantings with this particular project. So we want the people living, working, and playing closest to these installations to literally set their roots with this. So we have guided planting parties, and they learn what plants prefer to be in what spots, and now they are more likely to care for this after after the event because they help be a part of it. And neighborhoodforesters.org gives you more info on that. These images here show you the dramatic difference with these unirrigated rain gardens with the seasons. It's part of the cultural change and education we need to do, and that people are accustomed to landscapes always being irrigated and always looking lush. So the upper image shows you what that rain garden looked like after our driest year on record, okay, where we only got 100 millimeters of rain. And so those native plants are not dead. They are drought deciduous. So they go into their dormant stage under drought stress. And then 1 week after we got the first rain that broke that drought, that's the bottom image. Just a week, okay? So people need to be educated on, no, these plants, they're doing what they have adapted to do in the unique climate conditions of this place. And we find that our successes sometimes kick us in that we've got so much vegetation growing that it starts blocking public paths. So we've started to create these stewarding parties and trainings showing the folks that live, work, and play closest to this how do you properly prune and to keep the access going. And I need to just mention that because a lot of this was citizen-driven, we had over 600 GSI installations in Tucson before there was any GSI program in the city. And what really hit us hard and hurt us hard is then the city, for a while, was the biggest killer of our installations. city's own installations. Because what happened is there would be a complaint call of maybe garbage accumulating in a rain garden or a branch that fell in a storm and the city would send in crews, landscape crews, without any training, and they'd go and clear cut the entire installation. Okay, so many hundreds of thousands of dollars of grant money vanished like that. We started our neighborhood foresters program to train up the community so that they could help steward this. And any time a landscape crew showed up in the neighborhood, they would be swarmed by neighbors with their phones out and asking, "Who are you? What are you here for? And who sent you?" And then phone trees started calling mayor and council and city departments saying, "Can you call these guys out of here and let's set up a meeting so we can coordinate next time?" So now, in 2019, 2020, the City of Tucson's Green Infrastructure Program finally happened, and it got funded. So now they are hiring and training specific contractors, focusing on smaller locally owned contractors, so that they can properly care for this stuff. And we've been helping them with some of those trainings. But that's been essential. And I guess the take-home message of this little part is you can't just do the installation. You got to think, how's it going to be maintained over time as well? So kind of like how Rob was mentioning, we have the Storm to Shade GSI program through the city, but it's the citizens fill the gap of where the resources lack. And I think that's always going to be the case, and I think it's good that we have citizenry taking responsibility as well as the city, because we're all in this together. Okay. Just want to show you a few snow images. So this is in Pennsylvania. So John Geeling did this wonderful blog where he went out in the winter and he started seeing where the snow was informing us that pavement did not need to be. And because under that snow is pavement. So then took this to the city officials and said, nobody's driving here. There's no tracks in these areas. So why don't we turn these into rain gardens? And now the city's transforming those into rain gardens. So the snow can help us see what we might not otherwise see. And when I was just going around the community earlier today and I see all the snow piled up where it's been plowed out of the street, I'm like, why aren't there rain gardens designed next to the street to take all that snow? I mean, that's this wonderful irrigation source. You might be saying, well, we salt our streets. So then you get a plant pallet with halophytes that can take that salt. And then this is John Taylor in Flagstaff, Arizona, higher elevation. He creates temporary snow berms to direct street snow melt into his on-property rain gardens. And doesn't need a permit for it because it only lasts about an hour. And he just stands there and watches it and talks to the neighbors as they're like, what's going on? And then as soon as he's got enough flow, he shovels the snow off the sidewalk and everything continues as it did. Okay, and then here we have an image showing, well, our neighborhood in 2010 got a $500,000 grant to spend however it wanted to spend the money. So the neighborhood decided to spend it in 4 ways: water harvesting, traffic calming, tree planting, and public art. But instead of doing them separate, we integrated them all. So what you're seeing in this image is a street side water harvesting basin or chicane or pull out or bump out. There's all these different names to narrow the street, to slow traffic in the street, and to take the street runoff to freely irrigate all this. And within it is a sculpture by local artists of the Sonora suckerfish, which used to be indigenous fish that thrived in the Santa Cruz River before the river died. So it gets about this long. So folks used to walk a quarter mile from our neighborhood to the Santa Cruz River, take a swim, fish their dinner, and then walk home and cook it up. That's all gone. So this sculpture is reminding us of what we lost, the sculpture of the Sonora suckerfish. But it's also telling us what we could regain. Because within that Sonora suckerfish is a horned lizard. And the horned lizard has adapted in our area to literally harvest rainwater off its back. So when it rains, the horned lizard goes out into the rain, it lifts its rear legs to slope its back, its roof, towards its head. And the water travels through tiny gutters between its scales to its mouth. And so I just find it interesting that when I was, along with Megan, researching the totem species for Regina, that one of your endangered species is the horned lizard. And it too may have lessons for you, as so many other of the species that have uniquely adapted to what's unique of this place's climate, soils, and so forth. So I just encourage you all to also be looking at how can your GSI inform and inspire, and how can you collaborate with local artists as well. So to wrap up then, coming back to the questions I began with, so think again, what is the story of your place? What is it that you love about that place? What is it that you hate about the place or that scares you about the place? And then ask, so what could be the story of your place? How could you help lift that which you love? How could you help change that which you fear or hate? And what will be your role in that story? Because I find that there's no place of greater potential than our own individual watershed of influence and our own lives, because we have the maximum potential to make change there. So I encourage you to delve into that. And if you want more information on this, I can't recommend these books enough. So these are the latest fully revised full color editions of my books. I've actually got them, I'll have them over at this table at the end of today's stuff before we all break out to the dinner and stuff for sale at deep discount. And also check out my website, harvestingrainwater.com. Got a bunch of free resources there, a lot of videos and whatnot. And also check out the neighborhoodforesters.org website. Got a ton of information on how we're working with neighborhoods and communities so they can be the primary stewards and sometimes implementers too of their GSI. And thanks so much.
So have you, questions are welcomed.
Thanks, Brad, for that instructive and motivating talk. It makes Regina seem decades in the past compared to Vancouver too. And I think there's some real barriers here, beginning possibly with bylaws. I'm not sure I could modify the topography of my lot within the city bylaws. And I know I'm not supposed to grow a garden because a few years ago my wife said, "Dave, would you please get rid of our lawn?" Okay, so got rid of it. And she planted 54 perennial species, mostly native, in our front yard. People come by and say, "Wow, it's spectacular, but you're breaking the law." Apparently, in municipalities in Canada, you can't have a garden in your front yard. So, and I know there's some city people here. Maybe they can confirm that. We're told we're breaking the law.
That sounds like an awesome opportunity for a pilot project. And guerrilla or official. So, I mentioned our guerrilla project earlier. I had many sleepless nights worried that I was going to get punished. But by proactively approaching the city and asking for it to be considered a pilot project, no punishment incurred, but rather it was then became an official pilot project. So that's something that could be looked at. The other thing is there might be some parts of the city where some things are allowed and others where it's not. So that might help you strategize where you do certain pilot projects. In the state of Arizona, a precedent that we can utilize is used to be that homeowners associations they were not allowing solar installations like solar panels on roofs and stuff. So the state passed a law saying there can be no restrictions on solar installations. So a similar law based on same template could be applied for rain gardens or GSI under the right parameters. This is maybe something to look at.
Yeah, one thing, thanks for converting things into liters. That must be difficult for you. Because you used to gallons down there, right? In Regina here, and actually since we have winter time and stuff like that, we also have lots of basements. I'm guessing you guys don't have basements there much, because if we had pools and ponds of water adjacent to our house, we'd have a basement full of water. So that'd be one thing that we'd want to be cautious of. And another thing is storage tanks we'd have to have in the basement, and then we'd have to elevate the water to go out in the summertime. Other than that, pretty good concepts.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd say we have far fewer basements per house than you all do. Basic guideline is you want to be a minimum 3 meters from any house before creating a rain garden. And you're also making sure you always have the overflow, so that the overflow is heading in the direction away from the house, not back to the house. And the closer you are to the house with its basement, the shallower the rain garden, and the further you get from the house, the deeper the rain garden becomes. So everything's in relationship to everything else. And then it's also essential that you're planting right living pumps in right place. So you're really banking up your living pump vegetation on the basement side of the rain garden. So it's drawing up that water before it can migrate to the basement. I like to look at what might be perceived as a constraint, like a basement like that, is rather an opportunity to get a more dynamic, context-specific design. And then the other thing you mentioned is on tanks. So I purposely spoke very little about tanks in this talk, because that ups the level of complexity a bit. So yeah, because of your freezing issue, basements make sense to store the water in the tank. But the bulk of your precipitation is in the summer months, not the winter months. So you can also set up a tank system that you just disconnect in the winter months, and then you reconnect it when things warm up. At minimum, with tank or without, you're always directing your roof runoff to the passive strategies, the rain garden strategies, because you're always going to need an overflow route for a tank anyway. So I actually like to begin with my rain gardens and then bring in the tank after the fact. And I wanted to mention with the City of Tucson's commercial property, I didn't mention that we have, for all commercial properties, they have to provide at least 50% of the landscape irrigation demand with passive water harvesting systems. We set that up so no one had to put in a tank. You could save money. Yeah, we went that direction there too.
So I'm from the city of Saskatoon, and first I want to say I am happy to know that road runners are real. I didn't really. I thought it was just a cartoon thing, so that was exciting for today. My question is, when you started working with the city instead of your guerrilla planting, did you encounter many barriers, and how do they overcome them within their own policies? So, for example, in the city of Saskatoon, we have a food forest pilot that we are planting in 2 parks. And a food forest is supposed to be this permaculture 7 layers, beautiful thing, but then Parks wants it manicured in a way that is in 2 layers, maybe, plants and shrubs and trees. Our SEPTEDs, or crime prevention, wants line of sight and no shady, dense areas and things like that. So did the city, when they were starting their own projects, kind of fight within themselves, and how did they overcome that, or have any knowledge of that?
I can't speak so well to the inner city fights, just a couple. Gary Whitwer, who's the retired landscape architect for the Department of Transportation, shared with me that he was quite at odds with some of the engineers, not all, in the engineering department, because their schooling had really pushed positive drainage away from roads and whatnot. So there was a very real fear that if there was water that was migrating under the pavement and whatnot, that might undermine that infrastructure. But when we were having our initial dialogue to legalize water harvesting, who was one of our greatest assets was Frank Sousa, the now retired stormwater control head. And so he brought dozens and dozens of imagery from around the community that showed all these unintentional curb cuts, and where maybe the contractor didn't complete the curb, or something broke at some point, decades ago and was never fixed, and showed that there's no evidence in any of these scenarios of there being any infrastructure damage due to the infiltration of the water. So that really dropped the fear threshold. And the other thing that really helped is we could look to communities like Portland and Seattle that were already doing a lot of this. So it wasn't just coming from community activists, but it was coming from other municipalities. And they could then ask, what engineer to engineer. And so that helped a lot. When it comes to the plantings, we find there's a constant need for education around plant identification. What's a weed? What's not a weed? What's a native? What's not a native? And as that's been improving over time, I think some things have gotten easier. But when it comes to, say, like a food forest and sight lines, and there's a fear that of unhoused or homeless encampments under landscapes. Well, my experience is, the homeless or the unhoused issue, it's not a plant issue, it's a people issue. We have dense parts of the neighborhood forest that don't have any encampments because people are caring for it. It's a claimed space already. Okay, we strive to put the food forests where there's already maximum activity, traffic, and eyes. So we don't put it in the forgotten backwaters, which is an invitation for anyone and all to habitate, because we're not there. So let's instead focus our more dense plantings where the caretakers are, and so that's helped. I think it's a constant thing in the challenge is, I think we need to continue to challenge ourselves to evolve. And so what I'm getting at there is, I hate best management practices, because they're an excuse to stop evolving. It says, yeah, this is the best. You can't do any better. This is the best practice. No way. It's not. It's maybe pretty good right now, but it is not the best. So we create a ceiling. We're like, yeah, you've figured it out. You don't have to go any further. So I think we need to shift from best management practices to best questions. Questions that are continually challenging us to look at what we're not looking at, what we haven't considered. And instead of just trying to solve problems, how do we maximize potential? So use the questions that are trying to leverage you into that potential thinking. That would be another thing. So we have folks like, oh yeah, we know the plant palette we do for the rain gardens. We're done. No, we can bring in so much more diversity and so more services if we evolve that plant palette and diversify it.
Well, hopefully for Saskatoon, our food forest pilot next time will not be irrigated. So maybe it'll be more rainwater. All right, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? I just want to ask one thing. Now, you guys might be done, want no more, but I've got like 4 more slides that are just extras if you want to see them. And it's not the built environment. It's outside the city. Just want to show you just a simple little thing just to be aware of, hey, consider this. Okay. All right. So, okay, well, one is in the city. Real quick story that I like to share. So this is in Portland, Oregon, where southeast Portland, they got all these great rain gardens that narrowed the street, slowed traffic, made it safer for folks like the little girl on the bike and, pulling the stormwater off. So when I first toured this, I was like, my God, this is amazing. What makes this happen? And then talked to Dave Elkin, who was working for the city at the time, and he said, well, we've got the combined sewer overflow, like Rob was mentioning, and so they mapped out the whole city, and they highlighted the neighborhoods that had more issues with the combined sewer overflow, because apparently what was happening is every time there's a big rain event, so much stormwater was going into that sewage pipe that turds were floating up into people's basement drains and floating up in the streets via the street gutter inlet. So that's heinous, right? But it's also awesome because nothing drives political will like a turd floating up into your basement drain or floating up onto your street. So, the mayor, everyone's calling mayor and council, and they say, I don't care what it takes, get this turd off my street and out of my basement. So they prioritized the rain garden installations in the neighborhoods with the highest turd-to-basement drain ratio. And they initially were going to put in more pipes, okay, more drains, basically kicking the turd down to the river faster, all right? So thankfully, before they did, they had a change of thinking. So this would have cost $144 million to address just that one neighborhood. But before they implemented that plan, had a change of thinking and shifted from a lot of pipe to more surface infiltration and rain gardens. So much less pipe. And this dramatically reduced the cost of the system for a $58 million savings. But it also created an infrastructure that people could see and interact with that, was also making a more beautiful, livable community. So just a nice example there. Now, this is a dirt road on a ranch in southeastern Arizona. So I know you got a lot of agriculture around Regina in the area. So typically, the dirt roads tend to be the highest maintenance, highest cost area of the farms and ranches. Because it's not paved, so it ruts out real easy. You've got the vehicles going up and down it all the time, so it quickly becomes the lowest point of the landscape where all water drains. And it can dehydrate the downstream areas of the road because the road intercepts all the water from the upstream side, shunts it somewhere else, and everything below is dehydrated. So people put in road drains like this, but notice that the bulk of the water is still going down the dirt road because water takes the path of least resistance. So water is just moving down, the wheel ruts. They're just like a couple millimeters lower than the rest of the dirt road. So it's not working. So Bill Zedike, he is one of my big mentors. And I strongly encourage you to look up his name. So it's spelled Zeedyk, the Dike, Dutch. If you go to Quivira Coalition, I'll show that slide in just a moment, they've got a lot of free resources he's created, including one on how to create water harvesting dirt roads. So here, he's got a drain. He's standing in it, but it's wide. It's not narrow. So he's slowing, spreading, and sinking the flow of water rather than concentrating it. And then there's also a berm that's at a diagonal. So there's no way water can continue to go down this path. So at this ranch, the Elkhorn Ranch in southeastern Arizona, they work with Pima County to put in a lot of these rolling dips, they call them. And they made the rolling hill, the dip, wide enough and the drain wide enough that you can drive 55 miles an hour over these things, no problem. It's led to dramatic savings by the county and the ranch that they don't have to go after every storm and rework the roads. Now they're working great. But it gets better. So this is where that drain drains out. Now, maybe this is not impressive to you, okay? But in our climate, this is super impressive. Waist-high native grasses, okay, in an area that was previously overgrazed, and that's irrigated only with that runoff from the road drain. So this is really benefiting the rancher. They're getting much more production while also dramatically reducing the cost of the maintenance of their dirt roads. You can apply these same strategies for driveways, okay? So just want to make sure you're aware of that. This is then showing in what would be very similar to your climate. This is in the higher alpine areas of New Mexico. where a lot of the wetlands were drying out. And so Bill would create what he called a plug and spread. So water used to be just a down-cut flow, and it was bypassing the wetland, so the wetland was drying out. So he plugged up some of the flow that was going into the down-cut area and spread it out over more of the area. So in just 1 year, look how much more green has recovered, how much the wetlands has returned. Super simple strategy, okay? So just that intervention just took one afternoon, okay? Only using on-site material. And then this is showing a dried out, dead wetland, and this is it where it has come back in just a few years, and through the same strategy. But what I just want to mention, and sorry, I didn't put a lot of slides on this, what happened is there was a wagon road. So this whole area was a big alluvial fan wetland. And back in the early 1900s, the folks that started to ranch this area would bring their wagons uphill along the edge of the alluvial fan, but just the wheel ruts of those horse-drawn wagons, it became the new water channel. So that whole alluvial fan wetland was dehydrated because all that water went down the wheel ruts. That became a head-cut, new drainage, bypassing the whole wetland. So they plugged it, spread the water back out, and the wetlands are back. Okay? Only took an afternoon of work. And I just want to point out with this, it's insane, well, it's reality, just how quickly things can unravel and how unconsciously things can unravel, because we don't even see, I don't think the folks in the wagons had any idea this would be the end result. But it's also an easy fix when we start to tap in and understand what's going on. So again, what I'm going to do is give the organizers a PDF of this presentation too. So I don't know how legible, I maybe used too small a font there, with some of the resources that, the free online resources that you guys can tap. But again, go to Quivira, Quivira, coalition.org, go to the resources publications page, and download all the free resources by Bill Zedike. There's so many that would apply to you with dozens of different strategies that I haven't even had a chance to mention. But I wanted you to be aware of that. Okay, so thanks for giving me a little extra time. All right. And if you got more questions or whatnot, or want to peruse a book or get a book, I'll be there after this last bit before we go out to get food. Thanks again.
Thank you. Use a small print. You have to use it in the airport.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Okay, that concludes our day. And we will be hosting a dinner tonight. The bar will open at 6 o'clock, and dinner will be served at 6:30, and there will be a comedian to follow, I think at 7:30. Joel Jeffrey. The host hotel is Executive Royal Hotel at 4025 Albert Street. I wanted to mention as well that the presentations of today and tomorrow will be posted on SAW's website, in an event that you want to review them or share them with your colleagues. Tomorrow, the gallery here at the RCMP Center will be open for tours, and our conference will resume at 10 a.m. And lastly, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the sponsors, speakers, and delegates for participating in our 2024 conference today. And we look forward to seeing everybody at the dinner tonight and again tomorrow. Thank you so much.